What's up, boys? Undead's back with another Shadowlands beta video. We're finally talking about Unholy DK. I leveled up my DK. I got some dungeons done. I got some Torghast done. I got some whatever done. Granted, keys are not live on beta, so a lot of this I haven't been able to see in dungeons where, like, mobs actually live. It's all just Mythic Zeros or Heroic dungeons that we're able to do right now. But I think I'm able to get a pretty good grasp of how the spec's going to function in Mythic Plus. I've done no raid testing, so as far as that goes, it'll just be kind of me inferring from what I've seen in Mythic Plus how it's going to play in raid. And I've done no PvP, so we're not going to talk about PvP too much. So, first of all, what has changed? What do we have that we didn't have previously? We have Anti-Magic Zone. This is going to get Unholy DK's a raid spot, probably, that they wouldn't normally have, even if their damage gets nerfed a little bit. This cooldown's very good. It's going to be very good in keys as well. That's just a nice addition that all DK specs got. We have gotten... Death Coil is important. It has the heal effect on it because we've gotten Lichborn. You can use this to heal yourself. You can use Death Coil. Most times it's going to be worse than just Death Striking and not worth it, but it's a neat little interaction you can do. This is also a little mini defensive cooldown. We get Leech and immune to Charm, Fear, and Sleep. This is back baseline. We also have, this will be less useful for Unholy than the other two specs, but we have Sacrificial Pact. So you can sacrifice your pet to deal damage and an AoE around him, plus heal yourself for 25% of your max health. So this is a good defensive option. Little oh shit button. And then as far as Unholy goes specifically, Summon Gargoyle is baseline. So we'll talk about the talents later where Summon Gargoyle was. Epidemic can now, Sudden Doom now affects Epidemic. So you get free Epidemic procs from Sudden Doom. And as far as the baseline kit, that is all that has changed. There's been some reworking in the talents, some reworking in some target capping that we'll talk about that affects your talent choices. But as far as the base kit, that's what's changed. So, first row, the same. Second row, same. Only this talent has changed. There are some things that matter, though. We'll talk about Unholy Pact here first. This is a new talent in place of Gargoyle. This is effectively Hell Chains, the Azurite trait Hell Chains. So a line appears between you and your pet while your pet's Dark Transed, and does a bunch of damage, and it also increases your strength by 8% while your pet's while DT is active. This has proved to actually be very good in Mythic Plus. I think this will be what you play in Mythic Plus. Here, I'll just show you what it looks like. So you got this line here. We send our pet in, blah blah blah, and we're chilling. So that does damage to everything in the line. Unholy Frenzy still exists. Unholy Frenzy is still very good. It's going to be a bit better than Unholy Pact single target. Probably what you'll play in raid. As we look at how big the pack sizes get, maybe it ends up being better than Unholy Pact as well. Maybe the damage you get from the line doesn't end up being as good, but so far Unholy Pact feels really good to me. Unholy Frenzy feels good too, but it's yet again another button you have to press as Unholy, which I'll demonstrate in a little bit how global capped you are in a lot of situations. And then Army of the Damned is now better, but I don't think it's good enough. So Death Coil and Epidemic both reduce the cooldown of your APOC and your army by 1 and 5 seconds respectively. And this also has Magus of the Dead baked into it. So the old Magus trait is now in here. This is likely to be more competitive for raid than Mythic Plus. Just because in Mythic Plus, because of how APOC and army are just like strictly single target cooldowns, the value of getting an extra cast of one of them in keys is not quite as high as it would be on a raid boss. So again, look out for this in tuning. Those are my thoughts on it right now. Tuning is obviously going to change things, and that's that. Now, this talent row, I think Epidemic is just an always take now. Pestilence still functions the same way. This can only generate a total of 1 wound per tick. So it says it has a 10% chance, but every time it ticks, it can only generate 1 wound, which means it can only generate 10 total wounds in your D&D. It could be useful in like an MDI setting. If you paid attention to the MDI tournaments, a lot of us DKs played Pestilence just because there wasn't time in the packs to even hit Epidemic. It wasn't so much that Pestilence was really good. It was so much that the pack had to die inside D&D or you were going to wipe. So you played something that amped your D&D slightly instead of amping your damage after D&D, which is how Epidemic works. The reason Epidemic is so strong right now is just because it's uncapped. It's an ability left uncapped. Most of DK was left uncapped, and slowly they've started picking away at it. As we get to each one of them, we'll discuss that. But because Epidemic is uncapped, this ability is immensely strong, and it also synergizes with the Swarming Mist, which is the Ventier Covenant ability, which is what I'm playing on here. There's 2 covenants I think that are viable, which will, after we're done with talents, I'll talk about them really quick. Defile straight up doesn't work with one of the covenants. If you go Night Fae, you just like can't take Defile basically. And I still don't think it's just not good enough. This is your utility row. I'm a big fan of Spell Eater and Keys, actually. I think this talent owns Wraithwalk for solo content. Probably Wraithwalk for raid, unless specific situations. Death Pact's good, but there was a time I thought Death Pact was really good, and the more I've played with the other 2, the more I just prefer them over Death Pact. So that's personal choice there. Worth noting on this row that Harbinger of Doom is slightly stronger now in AoE because this affects Epidemic. These sudden Doom procs give you free Epidemics as opposed to just free Death Coils. But this talent is not worth very much. It's worth just under 1 extra proc a minute. Shout out to Sistara for flaming me for thinking this could possibly be good. So it's not enough value. Soul Reaper's still the same, big single target damage. You can get a haste proc by killing the mobs, and Pestilent Pustules. On big AoE, Pustules is typically better, but the way that the class plays, specifically when you're Venthier, I think you're just going to default to Soul Reaper, actually, in Keys, and play for the higher single target damage, because this row is not going to be that impactful, and I'll explain why in a minute. This row, you take whatever you want. If your tank wants Grip of the Dead, you give him that. If he doesn't, you take Asphyxiate. That's just the way it be. Now this row gets a little bit interesting. So they buffed Unholy Blight. Unholy Blight now stacks 4 times. This used to just be damage that refreshed itself. It didn't stack up or anything. Damage wasn't very good. And that was that. Now, it stacks up to 4 times. And your minions deal 5% increased damage to enemies affected by Unholy Blight. This is important because our minions are dealing a lot of damage now. This is something I probably should have mentioned earlier, but it works right now. Our Mastery has been changed as well. Mastery, they've added minion damage into Unholy Mastery. So not only is it increasing the shadow damage from your wounds, from your D&D, from your epidemics, from all this, it's also scaling your minion damage. Previously, we scaled minion damage through Crit Haste Verse, and Mastery didn't scale minions at all, which made Mastery much less desirable in Raid, because minions were so much of your damage in Raid, and Mastery was just a stat that didn't do anything for them. So they fixed this like this. This might get some tuning. We'll see. We haven't really scaled into real gear, so it's hard to say if this is going to be nuts or not. It's very likely Mastery is just what you're going to stack, definitely for Keys, and potentially for Raid as well, with how strong this is. But anyway, so you have Mastery scaling on your pets, along with another 5% increased damage to your pets if they're inflicted by Unholy Blight. And the uptime on this ends up being really high, because it refreshes itself, right? So you have 6 seconds where it's refreshing itself, and then the final duration is 19 seconds. So you have over 50% uptime on Unholy Blight if you're hitting it on cooldown. It's 25-second duration with the full refresh, plus a 45-second cooldown, which has made this really strong. Ebon Fever is still the same. There's potential for this in Raid. Mythic Plus, probably not, just because these 2 talents are very strong, Mythic Plus. And then Bursting Swords has been capped. So, first they capped Bursting Swords. This we all knew about going into it. Bursting a Festering Wound deals 25% more damage and deals 339 shadow damage to 8 nearby targets. So the previous, that was effectively their way of making the quadratic scaling that DK had go away. And how that scaling worked is every additional target increased the amount of damage you're going to do to all targets by more than the previous target, because additional targets would generate additional wounds through infected claws, talk about in a second. And also those wounds would be popping against more targets, and then previous wounds would be popping against more targets. So they were scaling with themselves, causing each additional target to be more scaling than the previous target. So they fixed that by capping this, right? Now it's totally past 8, it's totally linear scaling, because there's no, every wound is only going to pop on 8 targets. You'll get more wounds, sure, but it's not going to pop on more targets. Fixed. We were like, okay. The quadratic was probably out of control. That's fine. So then in a recent build a couple days ago, they made this change to Death and Decay. While you remain within the area, your scored strike will hit up to 4 enemies near the target. So now, while you can still apply wounds to infinitely scaling targets through Infected Claws, you can only pull wounds from 5 mobs at a time. And Scourge Strike does not smart cast. It will not specifically target the mobs that have wounds on them. And it's not like your Infected Claws are going to specifically put wounds on the targets that you want to hit. So this effectively ruined, in my eyes, the playstyle that we played all throughout BFA. Of applying wounds to multiple mobs, waiting on D&D cooldown, dropping D&D, utilizing D&D to pull wounds off all the mobs. Now, in 5 targets or less, this is fine. This, you know what I mean? Like 5 targets or less, you're not going to have an issue. But as soon as you introduce an additional target, there's potential for you to just lose value on every single scored strike you cast, and you can end your D&D with many wounds still on the target. Whereas previously, as long as you got your wounds up and you got 6 scored strikes off inside D&D, you were going to rip all your wounds. All your wounds were coming off, and then you restart the cycle again. And it was this very cyclical playstyle that Unholy had. Especially in hierarchies where packs lasted long enough to get like a second D&D. The first one would be facilitated by DT, and then you would rip, and then you would build, and then you would rip again with your next D&D. So that playstyle is effectively gone. I mean, it exists, but it's been neutered, put it that way, which is pushing us towards other builds which are abusing the infinite scaling or the non-capped scaling of Epidemic. I think this is a bad change. I think they could have even just nerfed Bursting Sores more, or cap Infected Claws or something like that. I think capping the D&D was certainly the worst place. Like if they decided they needed to cap something, which like I don't think it should be capped anyway. If they needed to cap something, I think this was the last thing that should have been capped, was your Scourge Strike Cleave. But here we are. We'll deal with it. You figure out other things to play. Which brings us to the final talent row, which is Infected Claws, All Will Serve, and Clawing Shadows. Infected Claws still does have value. Like it's still like wounds are wounds. They generate runic power. Runic power is a big resource for us now because of how impactful Epidemic was. Previously, it was not uncommon to just purposefully overcap runic power in AoE because you needed to get X amount of globals off inside your D&D, and you couldn't afford to spend those globals on death coils or epis like you would Epidemic after D&D. So this is it plays a little different, but it's okay. All Will Serve is still the same. You get an extra boy. Oh, I gotta wait 10 seconds to summon him. Show us our little ranged man. Just passive damage. Potential for single target. Especially because he'll scale with mastery now. Like all these will scale with. Well, I guess Infested Claws will not scale. Sure will. It'll scale with mastery. And Clawing Shadows will scale with mastery. You got your little archer boy. He does like a tiny cleave sometimes. He doesn't do very much cleave damage. Mostly single target damage. And then Clawing Shadows being the pure shadow damage version of Scourge Strike with the range. This will all come down to tuning. Nothing. There's no way to really say what's going to be best here. Either more wounds will be more powerful, the Archer Boy will be more powerful, or the full shadow damage from this will be powerful. That's kind of all there is to it. So the build that I've been playing now that we've gone over these, specifically with the Ventier Covenant. Now Ventier Covenant is certainly the play for Frost. It's decent for Blood, and it's very close for Unholy. I think this and the blue D&D from Night Fae are very close. I think you're always going to go Night Fae or Ventier for PvE content if you're playing Death Knight, and you kind of just take a pick for what you want to specialize in. There's a 1-minute cooldown. It increases your dodge chance for 8 seconds. Also deals shadow damage every second around you. And every time it deals damage, you generate 3 runic power per target up to a max of 15. So effectively, every 2 ticks of this on a 5-pack is an epidemic. So this is insanely powerful when you end up in this playstyle with this build. You walk in, your diseases are up, Unholy Blight's out, you DT, you Swarming Mist, and then when you have enough targets, you're just generating, like, you just don't do anything else. You're just slamming Epidemic. And then after that, after you spend all this runic power, then your D&D comes out. Which is when you would take advantage of Infested Claws if you played it. So it plays a lot differently than it did previously. Like, you're not pre-building. At least when you play like this. When you play Night Fae, you'd play a little bit differently with some building going on. And you'd probably lean a little bit harder towards Infected Claws. Just because you don't have the raw runic power generation. So I think that's good. I think it's interesting that there's can be some distinct differences in how you play a trash pack in a dungeon based on what Covenant you take. Now, the way the D&D that I'm speaking of works, the blue D&D from Night Fae, essentially, you drop D&D, and every time D&D deals damage, it applies a debuff to the mobs inside it, and every time it applies that debuff, it applies a buff to you as well. These stack 15 times. The debuff is a damage dealt to you debuff, so all mobs deal 15% less damage to you, and then you gain 15% strength. So it's like a weird leech mechanic. It's very strong for blood. It's pretty good for Unholy too, just because we scale so well with strength. Along with Unholy Pact increasing our strength too. So that's another option. I'll briefly talk about Necrolords. Necrolords is a 2-minute cooldown that just grips everything and does a bunch of damage. It will probably see some play in PvP. If Arena is your jam, I would try to find some other PvP focused channels that have done some testing with Necrolord and see how much value they've gotten out of that. And then finally, the Bastion Covenant ability is just a single target damage ability that puts a debuff on the target, and then every rune you spend reduces the cooldown of that single target ability while the debuff's on there. It's just not good enough. It's just there may be a world where it becomes good enough and you play it in raid, but for right now, that's it. And conduits, I don't have conduits or legendaries, so I can't speak about that until they add them back into beta. They were on the previous beta. I could look them up and just read off my thoughts on them, but I kind of want to play with everything before I add that. So there will definitely be an update to this video. I just wanted to make sure I got it out, because after I got the other 2 DK videos, I had a lot of you asking where the Unholy one was, and I wanted to at least give you like a, yo, I played a couple dungeons, I did some stuff, this is how I'm feeling about it. Overall thoughts is it's a little jarring, it's weird. I played a lot of Unholy DK, competing in the few tournaments that I did. You kind of get used to Unholy. I played it on live a bit as well, and the playstyle shift is certainly weird at first. You feel like you're not really doing anything, like especially in live keys when packs were small and you couldn't just abuse Infected Claws and like things like Pestilence like you did in an MDI setting. Unholy DK felt really satisfying to play for I think all of BFA, at least in dungeons. In raid it got a little snoozer, but in dungeons it felt really good, and now it feels, I don't know if it's because it's new or because it truly does feel bad to play. But it's definitely weird. And then one thing that does feel bad to do is, this is your opener on single target. How many cooldowns I have to hit? Army of the Dead. Put my dot up. DT. Unholy Blight. Soul Reaper for runes. Get to 4. APOC. Now I gargoyle, and now I'm dumping runic power to actually do damage. There's just so many things I had to hit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cooldowns. 6 cooldowns with 3 maintenance globals in between. That's your opener. It feels weird, man. It does not feel super good. I think some of this needs to come off the GCD. I don't know what. Right? You would think it would be something that doesn't cost a rune, like Dark Trans would make the most sense, or even APOC. APOC I don't think they will do. Even Soul Reaper. I think Soul Reaper off the GCD would feel really good. I think those would be the first two targets for me. I think I would pull DT and Soul Reaper off of GCD first. But I think something needs to be done there. We'll see what they do. And I'm sure that there will be another updated video once we have access to conduits and legendaries and I can actually play through. Because I know there's some stuff that's going to affect gameplay a little bit that I do want to keep you guys up to date on. So if you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel so you can catch me with new stuff. Next character I'm leveling, I've decided. I was back and forth between a lot of things. I was going to do Shaman, I was going to do Priest, I was going to do Demon Hunter, I was going to do, I don't know, whatever. I'm going to do Druid. I think that it is worth my time to invest in a range class that will likely be good in the raid, likely be good in Mythic Plus, just in case I can't find a raid spot playing melee. I would like to have the ranged option, and I've always wanted to really focus on Boomy, so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to do Boomy first, and then we'll do, obviously, Feral and Bear with the Druid when that gets caught up. But that will that's like probably more than a week out. Next few days, we're hoping a new beta build goes live. We thought one was going live today, and it didn't. So maybe they're just late because they were doing PTR stuff yesterday. I don't know. But if all goes as planned, we'll have new legendaries and new conduits to play with, and then some rogue updates will come, some DK updates will come, and then we'll work on Druid after that. So again, love to hear your guys' thoughts. If any of you guys are on the beta, what do you think about the way Unholy feels as well? Do you share the same sentiment as me that, like, obviously it's powerful, it's tuned to be very good, but it doesn't feel very good to play for me right now? Yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys probably on stream tonight, twitch.tv/undadtv. Come hang out. Peace.